Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we're on the next one that I have read in the 500 Kingdoms series, The Snow Queen. And I think one of the most interesting things about this is that it tells the same story twice from two very, very different angles. Now, I've never actually bothered to properly read Hans Christian Andersen's Snow Queen. I believe it's Hans Christian Andersen. But I have always been leery of him because the, little match girl, whatever the proper name of that one is, and The Little Mermaid are both really horrifically depressing stories, and, I don't trust his Snow Queen story not to be just as depressing. I mean, the basic idea of it, is the story that was riffed off of to create Frozen. But the rough idea of that story is that there's a young man and an evil Snow Queen Winter Witch person puts a shard of ice in his heart when he is very, very young, so that as he gets older, his heart becomes more and more frozen until he becomes an unfeeling bad person. And his best friend, girlfriend, something, has to basically go on a quest to rescue him and melt his frozen heart and to bring him back to being a decent person. And the Snow Queen starts off with that story, which this is the 500 Kingdoms, and in the 500 Kingdoms, as I have repeatedly said through the other videos on this series of videos, that in this series you have the tradition, which is a sort of a non-specific, sort of godlike force thing that basically makes people follow particular paths that if it recognizes someone's life is becoming like a story, then it will make them recreate that story. So that stepmothers with, two daughters of their own and one stepchild will, even if they're perfectly nice people, become wicked and, will get twisted by the tradition. That in the case of the Snow Queen story, that you will have young men who will become worse and worse and worse until, they're absolutely horrible, and their, young girlfriends will sort of wind up falling to tragedy. And it opens with her basically acting out the Snow Queen story, taking on the role of the Snow Queen she's known as the Snow Queen, but taking on that particular story role because she can turn this into a sort of a test in order to effectively teach him a lesson, because as she describes it, if she doesn't intervene, he's likely to become one of those particularly monstrous clockmaker types where you have somebody who becomes obsessed with mechanics and perfection to the point that he will, forget caring about humanity and be willing to murder people to bring his clockwork creations to life. And that his girlfriend, Gerda, is likely to become sort of one of those people who aids and abets their horrific spouses because they're so in love and so willing to believe that this person is always right and can do no wrong, that she would effectively aid and abet him into becoming a monster. And so this Snow Queen story is designed to do two things: to teach Gerda how to have a spine by making her go on this quest and have to basically learn the lessons therein, and to teach him the value of other people by making him be alone and isolated and have nobody telling him how awesome he is and nobody looking at him with big moony eyes saying, "Oh, you're so handsome and smart." And so what this does, what she does is she makes the Snow Queen story happen, throwing in a bit of Tamlin at the end, and by making this story happen with her guiding it every step of the way, she can reform him convince the tradition to make this follow a particular story path, and then make everything better and keep tragedies from happening. And that's, what she does. She intervenes in a story of two lost children in the woods, where there's sort of the babes in the woods, where their wicked mother, stepmother, whatever she was, decides she doesn't want to take care of the kids anymore, so she tricks them into getting lost in the woods, and they are supposed to curl up and die. And what she is able to do is to intervene to turn it into a story of two children who stumble into the arms of a loving family and grow up happily ever after with their new parents. And that's what the godmothers do. However, word reaches her through Godmother Elena, she who has been in the background through nearly this whole series, except for the first book, which was her story, that she is informed that there is somebody going around claiming to be the Snow Queen who has been destroying whole villages by basically turning them into just like pure ice and this whole thing. In the meantime, we have the Sami, which are, I believe, the sort of a Finnish peripatetic people from, because I believe it's Finnish myth that we're leaning into on parts of this. That one of their, this woman who is gifted in magic, and she's sort of a wise woman of her village, not officially, but it's kind of an official capital letters role. Her son and her son's fiancé wind up involved in this, that her son has gone to get training from a couple of master smith mages, and he's going to learn how to be a warrior smith mage person. That her son has gone missing, and her future daughter-in-law and herself, they set out on a quest to find him, and it turns out he's been taken by this woman who is impersonating Aleksia, our sort of protagonist. This is a something of an ensemble cast. It's really two lead people. There's Aleksia and I believe it's Anushka, and they're sort of the two leads on this. But Aleksia, the godmother of large areas of northern Scandinavia-ish, that you have this woman who has styled herself the Snow Queen, who is pretending to be the Snow Queen, and Aleksia basically finds herself having to do what godmothers don't do, that godmothers are supposed to nursemaid things. They are not supposed to go on adventures themselves. You are not supposed to enter the story, you are supposed to nursemaid it along, and while you can, in a way, play a role in the story, you are not the quester, you are not the adventurer, you are an obstacle and a shepherd and any number of things, but you are not the person going on the adventure. And in this case, she has to, because this woman is impersonating her and is effectively ruining her good name. Because up until then, she has been sort of the queen of the ice castle and an unapproachable, distant creature in the distance and so on. But she has not been evil. But that Snow Queen is bad. So they have to go on a whole quest to stop her. And the end of this quest is the Snow Queen story all over again. The same story that we started with, the story that she is nursemaiding through with Kay and Gerda, this young man and young woman, where the young woman needs to learn how to have a spine and he needs to learn to value people. We go to a place where instead of this being somebody attempting to teach a lesson, what you have is a caring young man who has been actually enchanted in such a way as to take away his caring for others to make him into a puppet. And so at the end of this, they have to go and, in effect, melt his frozen heart. And so his mother, Anushka, spends an hour talking to him working at breaking this spell. His mentor and pseudo-father figure spends time doing his best to work through and break the spell. And finally, his fiancée, who is Kari, I should say this. I don't remember names. I barely remember my own name. If I didn't need to remember my own name for government purposes, I might not. So the fact that I can't remember fictional characters' names is just on brand for me. But anyways, his fiancée also, of course, has to spend her time trying to convince him. And this is sort of reaches a grand climax because it turns out that this false Snow Queen is a woman who had basically sworn to give up on love and so on and so forth because she thought that her lover had abandoned her, and it turned out that he had not been abandoned. He had just been captured and enchanted and turned into a giant, terrifying ice stag thing. And that her swearing to never love again and destroy all love in the world, or whatever her vow was, meant that he couldn't get close enough to her. But anyways, so this turns into a tale, and indeed in the end very much shifts into a variant on the Snow Queen, so that we get this Snow Queen tale twice. Once in the bastardized version that Aleksia is using to create a better story, and once in a version that is actually an evil queen, has actually enchanted him and put ice in his metaphorical ice in his heart. And it's really, really interesting the way that this story then repeats twice and bookends this book, which is very, very enjoyable. This is also, this series appears to have been very much published through Harlequin, and this is the one book in the series that really doesn't have a central romance. It's not that Kari and Veiko, the two who are engaged, it's not that they don't have any romance. Obviously there is romance, they're engaged and they're in love and so on, but there are hints of a romance between Aleksia and Anushka and these two brothers who had been Veiko's, the son, the enchanted young man, that they had been his mentors, and there's sort of a hint of romance there, but there isn't an actual romance the way there is in all of these other books, and it makes this one a standout and very, very odd, especially for a Harlequin series. I suspect part of what got it published was more that A, Mercedes Lackey is very much a known quantity, and B, you have all the other books in the series, so having one book that doesn't have romance as sort of its central focus is, you can get away with that. That's fine. But it makes this an interesting outlier in the series. And, you have the usual smattering of various stories that come up. In point of fact, Aleksia she has an origin story that she discusses about how she became a godmother and how she had been on track to be the jealous sister who kills her sister for her sister's fiancé. Very much the story of that ends with a talking harp and things like that. So I think that is all I'm going to say about this one, and yeah, so I will see you all next week.